Hey everyone, Kumar Dattatreyan here with the Meridian Point, and I am pleased to welcome to the show today Scott Ambler, a pioneering voice in Agile methodologies and data practices who has helped shape organizations' approaches to software development over the past 3 decades. As co-creator of Disciplined Agile and author of over 30 books, Scott brings unique insights into how technology and methodologies evolve. He's currently pursuing a master's in AI at Leeds University and is focused on helping organizations navigate the intersection of data quality, artificial intelligence, and organizational transformation. All things that are near and dear to my heart. Well, I don't know about the data quality part. I need to get better at that, but everything else. So without further ado, let me please welcome Scott to the stage. Thank you so much for being here today, Scott.
Oh, thanks for having me, Kumar.
So you witnessed and influenced several major shifts in software development practices over your career. What key lessons have you learned about how organizations successfully adapt to technological disruption?
Yeah, so there's several observations. First, it always takes longer than you think. Everybody spins a story about how it's going to be really fast and really easy, and it's never actually the case. Another point that I think is critical to understand is that the old stuff rarely goes away. So you can spin whatever story you want about, technology X and it's going to take over everything. But technology A, B, C, D, all the way up to, W are still in place and will be for a long time unless you're purposely retiring it, purposely taking it out. So, we really are in these, technically dense, complex environments, and we will be until we decide to deal with it.
And what does dealing with it look like to you?
Well, we need to clean up our old messes, and this is one of the challenges that we've run into in the data, certainly in the data space, but in others, like our organizations have significant technical debt, and technical debt refers to low quality or not quite as good quality stuff. So we might have poor quality code, poor quality architecture, poor quality data, poor quality networks, and so on. And we never clean up the mess. We always, we're doing the new stuff, and there's always funding to do something new. There's always funding to bang out some new thing really quickly. And we talk about going back and cleaning up the mess one day, but one day never arrives. We never really get there. And so we have, we're swimming in this, technical debt sewage, and it's a bit of a problem. So we really do need to start actively fixing and addressing our technical debt. And some organizations do, and some developers have the maturity to clean up, do a little bit of cleanup as they go. But some of the messes are pretty huge.
Yeah. Are there examples in your experience of companies that do this well? And what would you say could be things that you would share, practices that they employ that keep them sort of on the cutting edge of technology, but not weighed down by all the technical debt that they could have accumulated over time?
Yeah, so I think that the organizations that do it well, and there's not many, they build addressing technical debt into their culture and into, they allow the development teams to fix things and to clean up messes when they discover them, because you could have some poor quality code written 20 years ago, and then you just stumble into it now because nobody's touched that code for 20 years. So fair enough, right? So, clean up as you go tends to be a common strategy. But also realizing sometimes, you do need to explicitly fund a project to do a major cleanup or a major retirement of an existing system. And so the organizations that understand the implications of technical debt, who are measuring the technical debt as well and understand what those measures are telling them, are the ones that tend to do better. They also realize that some common project management practices, and it's easy to blame the project managers, but and part of their job is to be blamed, I guess. But this on time, on budget nonsense is a killer from a quality point of view, right? Because how do the development teams react to being forced to be on time and on budget for almost always some fictional schedule and some fictional budget? Well, they cut quality corners. and then that just adds to the technical debt, which then slows them up, or slows them down. So it's this problem that builds on each other. So unless the project managers push back against the business people, who are almost always applying pressure to get something out the door quickly, the organization is never going to get away from that. And so the organizations that like really understand technical debt are the ones that address that and realize that some of these best practices in other parts of the organization, such as project management, are actually relatively bad practices when you look at it from more of a systemic point of view.
That brings me to disciplined agile, and I suppose just the word disciplined in front of the agile, it sort of connotates that you need to be aware of quality, data quality, all kinds of different quality practices, I suppose. Just a short sort of, how did that come about, and what is, in your view, and I have some questions about data quality in general because I know that's your focus. How important is that to whatever methodology you're using, whether it's waterfall, traditional project management, or agile?
Yeah, so data I think is critical across the board in your organization. The data people will tell you that data is the lifeblood of your organization, and arguably it is. But my observation has always been, well, if you only have the lifeblood, that's referred to as a crime scene. So you need to look at the bigger picture, and this is what we did in DA. We didn't just look at the agile purist, let's go off and do whatever nonsense that they were pitching. But we looked at the overall bigger picture, which is where the discipline comes in, and realizing you need to do some upfront planning. You need to, actively improve as you go. You need to actively choose the right techniques, the right ways of working for your situation, for your context, which might not always be agile. Sometimes it's lean, sometimes it's more traditional. So DA was really a hybrid. And being a hybrid, we took data considerations into account. And because the rules are different for data, like some of the excuse me, some of the common DevOps techniques that the developers have been adopting for almost 2 decades now, I guess, are different in the data world. So continuous integration is different for databases because databases have persistence, have persistent data in them, and you can't break the data. Doing automated testing of a database, also different because, once again, the persistent data. Refactoring a database is different than code refactoring because of the persistent data. So you have this common complexity or this common constraint of persistent data whenever you're doing anything in the data space, and it sort of messes up the classic agile and DevOps techniques. Now, there's ways around it. It's just more, you got to be a little more sophisticated, and you got to understand the implications of what you're doing. But it's all doable and it's all highly desirable. But the challenge becomes one of the agile community, which focuses on software development, really doesn't understand the data stuff very well because that's not their background. The data community, they don't really understand development all that well either because that's not their background as well, but they do understand the data stuff. So there was never really a lot of overlap between those two communities, and they were both happy with that. The Agilists had some phenomenally naive strategies for dealing with data. The data folks basically just ignored the Agile stuff because they believed it didn't apply to them, and both those groups were wrong. So my work over the years has been around, well, wait a minute, how do we take an agile approach to data stuff? How do we bring more quality to the table? Because the traditional data people, they talk a good story about quality, but it's only a story. Like yeah, whatever is always my response. I look at the actual results. It's like, spin whatever story you want. What are your results? And the results have been really bad. We've got most of our organizations have some very significant technical data debt, and they need to clean it up. And the traditional data folks don't really have a coherent strategy around that. And it's hard. There's some complexities there without a doubt. But I'm asking them to step up and do their jobs. For once, do your job, please. And they need to adopt new ways of working.
So you mentioned something that resonated with me. Sort of the agile people are sort of naively thinking have certain mindsets, and the data people are naively in their own little silo, not really interact with the agile people. Where have you seen it work where it's they are communicating with one another, they are talking data quality first, and so on and so forth?
Yeah, so I'm seeing it more. I'm seeing more in organizations that are starting to look at AI seriously. That are beyond the we're piloting it and playing with LLMs, and I'm seeing it on Data Vault 2 teams. These data warehousing, business intelligence teams that are actually working in complex environments at scale with big data, with like just horrendous volume, almost always lots of change. So that just forces them to be agile. And the interesting thing about the Data Vault 2 method is that it adopted Disciplined Agile delivery as its delivery, a tailoring of it as its methodology portion of the overall DV2 strategy, because of this just hardcore reality of data teams needing to react to changes in the marketplace and changes in the needs of their stakeholders. And an agile, a lean approach to that is the way to go. You can't go off for weeks or months and do data modeling and all this sort of stuff. During that period, the requirements are going to change. And so we see these traditional predictive approaches just failing miserably across the board. So I think reality is forcing data professionals into a more agile, more streamlined way of working, which is why we're seeing DevOps or data ops, I should say, more and more popular these days.
That's interesting. So you feel that AI is sort of forcing the issue, if you will, right? Because you have to have a really good understanding of the data, and as you're iterating through understanding how to use AI in different ways to it's forcing the meeting, if you will, of the data people and the agile people.
It is. Plus, an earlier trend around organizations wanting to do data-driven or data-informed decision-making really has forced that issue, because the needs of the stakeholders change. You get to this point where you get all this constant stream of changes, and they're fairly small. And the old way of working of, well, we'll do it next project. Next year we'll get to your request that you asked for this morning. That's just not acceptable. So, between having to support real data-driven decision-making and now AI, it's really forced the issue for the data community. And it's one of pure quality, right? Your decisions can only be as good as the quality of the data or the quality of information that you're basing them on. And same thing with your AIs. If you look at the AI, some of the recent surveys around AI adoption in organizations, almost always the number one or the number two challenge faced by organizations is the quality of the data.
Yeah, I'm curious. You've written about how AI will impact management roles. How do you see leadership practices evolving in an AI augmented workplace?
Yeah, so AI is affecting all white collar work, as we're seeing, and certainly that includes management. So we're seeing a lot of the more onerous or repetitive work that white collar workers, including managers, are doing. That's being automated, or some cases automated away. So parts of your job are disappearing. Certainly people are just using simple LLMs like ChatGPT to augment what they do. So the writing of reports, like brainstorming, there's a lot of activities that you can augment using ChatGPT or Gemini or something similar, and knock hours off the work sometimes. So I think there's a lot of and then all the Copilot stuff for all the management tools and just Microsoft Office and good stuff like that. It's really we're seeing more and more AI, and it's just sort of whittling away at some of the more onerous aspects of what we do. So I think it's very interesting how we're just seeing it. Everything's just sort of rising. So it's a very interesting environment right now. Let
Do you
alone.
see any?
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
No, yeah. No, please finish.
Yeah. Like let alone point specific apps. So and this gets back to the data quality stuff. Organizations are slowly adopting AI for like developing AI solutions to support their business processes, and that's a bit slower because of the lack of data or lack of quality data. But we are seeing more and more organizations starting to move in that direction and building AIs that specifically augment decent sized portions of the overall business process or create new business processes. And that's where we're going to see, like, for the rest of this decade, we're going to see some very interesting things happen. But it's all going to get back to, does your organization have the skills to do the job? Do they have the, do they have the data? And without those two, you're going to struggle for a bit. But these are all surmountable problems.
Sure. I suppose if you look at the other end of the spectrum, you did mention, Copilot and how, people that are not in management or leadership roles are also using these tools to help them augment their work. What is your impression of the tools that allow people to code faster, or sort of use a Copilot to be their to pair program basically with an AI, or have you had experience with that?
Yeah, so so when I was working on my master's, I've actually finished it now, but it was interesting. We had very strict rules about using AI to do our work, but uh, some of the limited things that I could do, which actually built up really good habits, where I could use the LLMs or Copilot, which is based on an LLM, to write or suggest small pieces of code. So I would write something and then I would put it in Bing or whatever and say, give me a more Pythonic version of this. And that would save me 20 minutes. Again, stuff I could do myself, but it would save me 20 minutes or half an hour. And clean up tighten up my code, and more than likely make it more efficient as well. So what I was doing, and what a lot of people do, they'll use these AI tools to write small little pieces of code or small pieces of text if you're running a report, and they're very good at that. But you still need to know, you need to know what you're doing, right? So I would write the code, I would get it working, and then I would use the AI to clean it up. I could also ask the AI, and I don't really do this all that much, but to write me a piece of code to do this. Then you're sort of getting a bit questionable because it's not yours. Can you actually trust it? But the point is that I know what I'm doing, right? I could write that code. It's just I'm using the tool to augment what I'm doing. And that's a good thing. Or I could write a report, or I could write, maybe not write a poem, but I could probably write a poem, and maybe use ChatGPT to write a better poem. But I sort of have a clue. Now, the problem which I'm seeing is you'll get people using these tools to write massive amounts of code, not realizing the way they're architected, right? So LLMs are basically prediction engines. They're predicting the next token, the next next word or the next piece of text. And the further out you go, like the bigger the thing that you produce, the greater the chance that the stuff towards the bottom that's generated last is wrong. Like the stuff towards the top is probably right, stuff towards the bottom probably wrong. And then so when you have people generating large amounts of code at once, or large amounts of documentation at once, then you've got a pretty, you're going to have a quality problem with that. So when you have people who really aren't that good at coding, who aren't that good at architecture, and they're using these tools to generate a lot of code, it gets down to the old saying, a fool with a tool is still a fool. And this, I think, is where organizations are running into trouble. So there's no magic. You still need to know what you're doing. You still need to have the skills to do the job. But part of having those skills enables me to use and leverage these tools in an effective manner. And I think this is where we need to recognize this. So I think right now we're still in the early days of the hype. around all this, and we're seeing studies come out that the code being generated isn't as good as what the humans generate. Now, a lot of it though is there's a lot of averaging going on, so you got a lot of people that are generating way too much code, and as a result, you get poor quality. But the people who are generating snippets, they're getting pretty solid stuff for the most part.
Yeah,
And
that makes sense.
you gotta know what you're doing.
I suppose, like with anything, right? There's always going to be a tool that helps you do your work a little bit better. And one of the hallmarks of human existence is our ability to use tools to augment our abilities to do work, right? Throughout history, and AI, if it's viewed in that light, it's just another tool. You have to know how to use it. You have to know how to wield it. And yes, they are getting more powerful. Do you see a day where AI will take over and you could just sort of have a conversation and tell it what you want, and it'll just code what you expect?
I doubt that very highly. Like unless you're asking it for like absolutely trivial things, right? Like
Yeah.
I've seen, demos where people are asking for, like, for somebody who doesn't know what they're looking at, it looks pretty sophisticated. For somebody who knows the name, like, okay, yeah, so generate a data entry screen. Who cares, right?
Yeah.
Like, so what? Yeah, but it's cool. But if you know how to code, if you don't know how to code, then it's awesome stuff. So I doubt it. But if we ever come to that day, I think society is going to be so hosed that I don't think it'll matter. If we really get to the point where the programmers have been truly replaced by AI, we're going to be the people turning the lights out. It won't be anybody else. Everybody else will have been knocked off much earlier than the programmers. But
Yeah.
anyway, I'm not worried.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. All right. So looking sort of broader, we've been sort of diving into some specifics in terms of how people navigate change, and the importance of data quality and its impact on AI, and the impact of AI on leadership and management and the people that do the work. What would you say? Boy, I lost my track here. Yeah. What is sort of the most important? You talk a lot about context being important, right? So the DA approach, the Disciplined Agile approach, is all about context. You do what makes sense and what's right, and you don't sort of become all dogmatic about an Agile approach for everything if it doesn't work. So when you think about context, how important is understanding context when helping organizations just navigate disruptions and change?
It's absolutely critical, right? So the observation I make is that every person, every team, every organization is unique, and they're constantly changing and learning and evolving. So one size does not fit all. Like regardless of what the framework people want to sell you, it's obviously true that one size does not fit all. So a team of 5 people will work differently than a team of 50. A team that is co-located in a single room will work differently than a team that is spread out across the planet. A team in a regulatory environment will work differently than a team in a non-regulatory environment, and so on and so on. My team in the exact same situation as your team will work differently because we're a different group of people with different backgrounds, different priorities, different ways of working, different preferences, and so on. So one size does not fit all. So trying to force fit a process on people, a way of working on people, is a fool's game. So what you really need to do is understand what context is this team in, what context is this person or organization in, and then teach them to identify the appropriate way of working for them in their situation that actually achieves whatever goals they're trying to achieve. And then as their situation changes, including them learning, including changing requirements and changing technologies and changing priorities, then they need to evolve their way of working. So the challenge, I think, for organizations is that once you accept this reality, then you've got a very interesting issue of, well, how the heck, as a senior leader in the organization, do I govern and guide these teams? Well, you can have, so you need to be flexible. You need to be qualified to do your job. And that's usually the harsh conversation I have with the governance people, is that, no, we're not going to inflict the same way of working on everybody to make it easy for you. What
Mm.
we're going to do is we're going to allow them and help them to find the best way of working for them in their situation. And then we're going to find a way for you to govern that still governs and still, is regulatory compliant, whatever concerns you've got. And that will be more likely like a risk-based, a risk-driven approach rather than a documentation or a process-driven approach. And that is a very important nuance that a lot of organizations struggle with, because
Mm.
remember in the 90s and even into the early 2000s, we had a lot of organizations that bought into the CMM or CMMI vision of, one
Mhm.
process to rule them all. And we're still getting that out of our system. There's still a belief that all these teams need to work in the same sort of way, which is why we're seeing, why these agile frameworks were so popular,
Yeah.
because it spoke to management. It was like this fantasy message for management of just force your people to do this and you'll be able to govern. And that never played out, right? It just, and all it did was cause confusion and strife. And the numbers really never worked out for the vast majority of organizations that did this. So yeah, it's like time to step up and do your job.
Yeah.
Uh,
I love that. Do your job.
yeah.
It
And you might
really
not,
boils down to that.
this is the thing, right? Just because you're a senior executive doesn't mean you're actually qualified.
Sure.
I find it interesting that we've sort of forgotten about the Peter principle. You remember that in the 80s and 90s,
Yeah.
how we talked about that a lot, and then sort of went away. Well, maybe we need to bring that back as a concept, because the world's complex. I don't want to ding the executives. They're doing the best. They're smart people doing the best they can in the situation they face, but the situation they face is complex and constantly adapting. So it's a really tough position to be in.
Yeah.
Like that's a
I
position
agree.
that, if you want to take it on, that's
Yeah.
the situation of taking on.
No, I'm with you on that. So we're going to end this with a few fun questions, just to
Okay.
get the audience to get to know you a little bit better. So, are you a coffee or tea person?
Both, but more coffee, 60-40.
All right, awesome. So I understand you collect and restore 8-bit Atari computers. Is that
I
right?
do. Yeah.
What's the most challenging one you've tackled so far?
Most challenging, probably, well, obtaining a 1200 Atari 1200 XL was hard. They didn't make a lot of them, and most of them broke. They were
Mm.
really sort of junky, and then getting it running. But the common challenge is when you're playing with, like, 35, 40-year-old equipment, just turning them on can burn them out.
Ooh, wow.
It's you really got to be careful. Like dust and grease and old
Yeah.
nicotine from smokers, you got to be really careful when you turn on something that's been in a closet for 30 years.
So what do you do? Do you clean it out and sort of,
I
yeah?
open it up, right? Yeah. First thing I do is I'll open them up and see, and you can see right away, or smell. Often you can smell, like if it's been in a
Mm,
smoker's home, you can smell it. But yeah, I take it apart and then turn it on, hope for the best. And sometimes you just burn it out. It is what it is.
yeah,
It's yeah.
makes sense. So you've written a lot of books. What are you reading right now?
I'm actually working. Excuse me. I'm working through Stephen King's book on writing. It's the first Stephen King book I've ever written or ever read.
Uh-huh.
I'm thinking about starting to read some of his stuff now. Wonderful book. I'm also reading Robert Aspen's Thieves' World.
Mm,
It's about 40 years old. It's a collection of short. It was a series of books. It was a collection of short stories in this. Uh, it's a fantasy world that he created.
huh.
So it's like some heavy hitter authors wrote from over the years, and it sounds like he managed the overall short story process. So that's what I'm looking
Sounds
at
really
now.
interesting. Yeah, that's my genre. At least I do like fantasy and science fiction, so I'll have to check it out. What have I not asked you that you'd like to share with the audience?
Oh, good question. I think just what am I up to now? And I think the answer is, well, I'm writing a new book.
Hmm.
It's tentatively titled "Achieving Continual Data,"
Mm,
and it's all about how do we actually provide the data that executives need for data-driven decision making and supporting AI development in like an enterprise class organization. And it's a novel. It's writing it as a
oh,
creative
okay.
nonfiction novel. Yeah.
That's awesome. Are you using AI to help you write it?
No, zero AI. So, well, other than, like the, grammar checker, spell checker
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
stuff,
Yeah.
yeah, you can't get away from that anymore.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, no, zero AI. I'm a firm believer in data pollution, and I think
Yeah.
all this stuff that's being generated by AIs, and because everybody's like banging out these mediocre blog postings now, and creating a lot of really cheeseball material. It's polluting the infosphere, and that's
Mm,
no good. And I'm not going to do that. So, and you don't know, right? It's all
yeah.
still, for the most part, it's stolen material, and I'm not gonna. I don't want to get into any sort of IP issues because I
Yeah.
use AI.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So when do you expect this to come out?
Probably in the fall.
Okay. Very good. Well, Scott, it's been a pleasure having you on.
Oh, thank
And
you.
I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did.
Oh, I do.
Thank you very much.
Well, thanks for having me. Always happy to have a great conversation.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks for watching, everyone, and we'll catch you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.
See you, everybody.